First off, I must stress that most of the slides, or some of the slides you're about to see, present a massive magnification of the model. So the results in some close-up cases do look rather crude. The model is just 5 inches long, so we are talking about small-scale work on a model of a very small ship. I made this model hull in 2000, so I'm a bit rusty on how I built it. In fact, when I take a look at it, I wonder how on earth I did it. Now, some 63 years ago, I decided to start building ship models to scale. As a teenager, I had built working semi-scale models, usually of hard motor launches. Unfortunately, that decision to build models to scale was made when I was in Kenya. Kenya was not a country which at that time was not equipped to supply the model maker, so materials were a problem, as was space. My tools, such as they were, could be housed inside a box normally used for carrying 7.62 rounds for the current self-loading rifle used at the time. I therefore decided to build a relatively easy subject, the Thames barge Schooner. And she was built at 1:144, or 1/12 of an inch to the foot. The hull was carved from solid target wood. For the barge, that was not too difficult, but for later models, not as easy a job as one might think. The center line was cut out of the liner of a .22 ammunition box. The deck was made from Bristol board, a type of really good card, and a broken down wristwatch helped with some of the fittings as the winches. The sails were made from government property lavatory paper, suitably tanned. The result was therefore what could loosely be termed as a sailor's model. I have actually sailed one of these vessels. For some time, I had been in love with a schooner rig. As it happened, I had brought out to Kenya with me a copy of Chappell's masterful volume, The History of American Sailing Ships. Included therein was a description of the famous racing schooner, America. And she had a hull shape to die for. So I decided to follow the barge with a model of her at the same scale. Now, Kenya was not an ideal location for research in those days. No internet, no local source of information. So I decided to correspond with Howard Chappell, who promptly sent me a blueprint of the vessel with the advice that I would be unlikely to get a more accurate plan. I prepared templates and set about building the model using the same method as I had for Schooner. Now, for years as a schoolboy, I'd been drawing pictures of what to my mind is the perfect outcome of a hull with fore and aft sail, the Grand Banks fishing schooner. Indeed, I had assembled a plastic model of the Gertrude L. Thibault, a Gloucesterman from a pyro kit way back in 1956. And in Kenya, I found a picture of another of this class, and this was the Gloucesterman Elsie. In a book which I saw in a bookshop in Nairobi, of all places, it was by Bjorn Lundstrom and called The Ship. It has outstanding illustrations. Now, whilst I followed the same procedure as with the preceding two models, in this case I planked the hull with thin card. It's difficult to see here due to the small scale of the model. You can just make out the scuppers along the line of the deck and possibly the planking over the deadwood. Later in Germany, I built another schooner, but this time at 1:64. His Majesty's armed schooner Chaleur also features in Chappell's book. In fact, her profile is on the hardback front face of his book. She was the first schooner in the Royal Navy, but had been built in America. But then I decided to try a hollow hull and chose to stay with schooners and build Sir Edward Hawke, a Marblehead schooner, one of a pair bought into the Royal Navy in America. And this model is 1:144. It was brought in shortly before the American War of Independence and destined for anti-smuggling duties around Jamaica. Having served for a couple of years there, she sailed for England. On arrival, she was condemned, but had her lines taken off before disposal. I decided to return to that scale of 144, and this was to test my ability to make very small fittings. Once again, the lines came from Chappell, but I was helped by an excellent book on the colonial schooners by Harold Hahn. The schooner features in his diorama of a colonial shipyard, shown here, and this gave me an idea of the rig and deck detail. Now, the skeleton is straightforward, bulkhead on a centre line, profile, making use of fine-scale ply. The body and profile plans gave enough detail for me to build that. Once the skeleton centre line and bulkhead was made, it was set, shown here, upside down on a jig, which held the centre line straight and upright whilst I planked the hull. The jig is set up with vertical stanchions, in between which the skeleton is placed, complete with its bulkhead slotted together and glued with a centerline piece. You can see a bulkhead example top right. The planks were cut from shavings of cherry. The shavings curl, so they have to be dampened, laid flat with a weight on top of them and allowed to dry straight. I marked off 15 points on each bulkhead to enable me to cut the planks to the right shape. Before applying these, they were heated and bent round an old inverted baked bean tin, which was held by a grab over a candle. Fixing was by glue and Trennel, the latter made from sharpened stained ends of cocktail sticks, and to my surprise, the job went quite well. I was concerned about the fragility of the planking. If I held the hull up to the light, the planks were translucent, so I decided to reinforce the hull internally with some timbers, again using very thin pieces of cherry, heated and bent, and these were sprung into the hull and clamped until the glue had set. The planks were then fixed by Trennels to them. Now here you can see through the hatchway a bulkhead on the left, the top edge of the centerpiece along the very bottom, close to where the hatch lip shows, and a timber on the right. The center line and bulkheads were cut back in this area. I also removed some planks at the turn of the build to show that the model was not solid. I liked the decks to be laid with individual planks, but at this scale, this would have failed. So the deck had a piece of very thin ply, as used in model aircraft building, with ultra-thin sycamore planks laid onto it. The fastenings are fake and are created by pinpricks and a light stain. Now, I cheated with the fiddly gratings by laying down very thin strips of wood in crisscross pattern. At this scale, it works unless placed under a magnifying glass. The master modelers have made them properly at this scale. Can you believe it? The cables, gun tackles, coils, and belaying pins, and the rigging to the bowsprit are all made from copper wire I spun together using 2 strands by placing the ends in a chuck of a horizontal mini-electric drill, leading them over a pulley at the top end of a 45-degree strip of wood with a model railway track laid on it. The other ends of the wires were attached to the coupling of the model railway truck, which contained some lead clippings in it to give the drill something to work against. Spinning the wires together made the track travel up 45-degree track, and depending on how much weight was put in the truck, the closeness of the weave could be adjusted slightly. As the work progressed, this Heath Robinson contraption could be edged closer to the drill so as to keep the truck within scope of the rail track. You can see an example of these cables and lines here. In some cases, they have been painted. The full-size diameter of the cables and lines is shown. You can see the result of this work on the bowsprit and on the gun tackles and on the coils on the belaying pins. I know that 2-strand rope is not true to scale in real practice, but at this scale, I felt there was artistic merit in doing so. It gives the model rope a semblance of texture. You will see that on the bowsprit here, there are some tackles set up without a stay or line attached to them. This is because the intention was to apply the stay direct to the tackle when installing the rigging, rather than trying to set up the tackle during the rigging process. The guns and swivels were laid out of cocktail sticks using the horizontal electric drill and a fine file. As far as I can remember, the blocks were made out of small plastic rods cut to a suitable thickness, or I may have punched them out of card. Some examples are shown here. In making up a tackle, I would set up the cable part first, winding it round 2 pins let into a block of wood spaced apart appropriately. Once the loop was finished, the blocks would be inserted at either end. I reckon this is only possible if you use wire, since wire will go where it is put and will stay there. Some may disagree. The yards are reduced cocktail sticks. The one on the left is the main topmast, black, the doubling, topsail yards, and the jack yards, plus the main gaff. Below them is the main boom and another gaff spar waiting to be blackened. I have a copy of Lloyd McCaffrey's Ships in Miniature. I used it a lot in building this model. He is, of course, working to 192, a tad smaller scale than mine. However, my model is of a very small vessel, 56 foot on the deck. Now, the model is now with John Garnish, who has kindly agreed to rig it. My hands now being incapable of fine work, and he will be speaking about this work in the September Zoom meeting. John may select to rig using Fly Tears silk. It would be interesting to see the comparison with my efforts in wire. You will recall his diorama of the Washington coming to the rescue of the crew of the sinking Philadelphia on Lake Champlain in 1776. His model is at the same scale as this schooner. Sir Edward Hawke he has also built, but at a scale of 1 to 164. When he's finished my model, it will rejoin my 2 other American schooners at this scale, the America and the Elsie, a delightful trio, all at 1 to 144. It just shows how small this vessel was. That's it. Thank you.